This evening, I would like to start by posing a question. When did you last visit a military cemetery? When was the last time when you granted a moment thought to the thousands upon thousands of mostly young men who have sacrificed everything so that you and your family may sit this very moment to live a life free from foreign tyranny? While this thought lingers, are your nation's leaders, who've been duly entrusted with preserving this hard-fought for liberty, doing it with the sanctity it genuinely deserves? Good evening, I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is the 18th edition of TV7 Europa Stands. Joining us to dissect Europe's state of internal and foreign affairs are retired General Klaus Naumann, who is the former Chief of General Staff of the Bundeswehr and Chairman of NATO's Military Committee, Professor Uri Rosenthal, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, Professor Jacek Czaputowicz, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, and Mr. Timo Soini, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Premier of Finland. And I'd like to start with you, General Naumann. Are the leaders today understanding the gravity that has brought them to that moment where they need to take critical decision-making for the future and liberty of respective nation states?
My answer to that is a flat no. And I think they don't understand how serious the situation is. I think for that reason our nations don't understand how serious the situation is. If I look at my country, the majority believes everything will go well. And if you speak of sacrifice, there's a generation which doesn't know what sacrifice is. They know how to spell it, but that's all. And if I give you the example of my family, my grandchildren are the first in 100 years' time who enjoy the privilege of seeing a family of 3 generations alive. None of us before has ever seen it. And that is a circumscription what sacrifice means for normal people. Since they enjoy this privilege, they do not think about what will happen tomorrow. And our governments, I think, fail to tell them how serious the situation is. I'm sitting here with 3 foreign ministers. I think they all learned how to cope with one crisis. But what we are seeing at the moment is that there will be 3, 4, 5 crises at the same time. And our governments are not prepared for this type of crisis management. So I think we are in a very serious situation, and it will be high time to tell our citizens how serious the situation is, how dangerous the situation is, and to remind them what I learned when I was a young officer, that the old General MacArthur was probably right when he said, duty, honor, country. If you say this today to a German young citizen, that may be something you have to think about it. He will not understand.
Professor Rosenthal?
Well, let me say that I remember that at a certain moment there was a discussion in my country too about the benefits and the disadvantages of being a member of the EU, of the European Union. And then the mantra was actually that we shouldn't tell the generation, the younger generation, that the EU started from the idea not to have a new war on the European continent. And that was quite a striking fact, that we were actually so far behind the end of the Second World War that it was not a vivid memory for the younger generation. Now, I would be a little bit more gentle on your question than Klaus. I would say that at least the leaders in Western Europe, for instance, do understand that there is some sort of a wake-up call with the aggression from Russia against Ukraine. The fact that up till this very moment they stand more or less together is I would say, a minor miracle by itself. At the same time, I would go along with Klaus when I look, for instance, to the very fact that when I consider the problems which the population in the Netherlands, for instance, face, or say they face, it is not about the war in Ukraine, but it is about, and it is written large in the Dutch press, that by now 1 million people in the Netherlands would live in poverty. Now, what does poverty mean at this very day in 2023? It's a different kind of poverty from the first months after the Second World War, you know. So we talk about a population which is only focusing on what we call rising expectations for themselves, and the sad side to what is happening in the world is a little bit secondary to them.
Professor Czaputowicz?
So I was at the cemetery, military cemetery in Warsaw just the 1st of August. It is an anniversary of Warsaw Uprising, 1944, and tens of thousands of Warsawians, inhabitants of Warsaw, gather there every year to celebrate and to commemorate those who paid their lives for liberty, freedom of Poland. It was 200,000 people from Warsaw who were killed by the Germans during that time, during that 63 days of Warsaw Uprising. At the same time, Soviet army was on the other side of the river, waiting after this uprising is suppressed by Nazi Germany. So we commemorate them, we understand that. And I'm there every few months, also due to family members laying there. So another anniversary very important for Poland was 14th of August. We say that August, it's a day of the country, of the nation. It is the day of Polish military. It was in 1920, Polish army stopped the Bolshevik Soviet Union army to go through to invade Europe. It was 103 years ago, and we still remember that, and we organize every year a military parade to commemorate that. And I think that the Polish government just understands the importance of sacrifice, of investing in the military. So we try to do it. We try to enlarge the army. The decisions are taken. We enlarge the military budget. The target is 4% of GDP. We invest in buying weapons in order to deter the potential aggressor, which is Russia, of course. Very recently, we moved our army units closer to the east because there is a danger from Belarus to penetrate the country, especially after the so-called Wagner group members were employed by Lukashenko regime in Belarus. So I think it's a good decision, and we are, I think, good example in NATO. We hope other countries will follow that.
And do the leaders, however, translate efficiently the imminent danger, potentially, from Belarus, as you noted, with Wagner forces being on the doorstep of Poland? Are they able to translate that to the people who are not necessarily fully integrated into the Western mindset, as is the case in Germany and the Netherlands, but are still close enough to realize that life can be without war?
Of course, people understand and they support government. It's also the way you get support. If people are afraid of some dangers coming from the east, then they support this strong government. And there is a acceptance for this investment in Poland, in military. So that's very good. So I can say that they translated into the practical, so to say, decisions. Sometimes it's very difficult. For example, if you want to invest in the army, there is no production in Europe of tanks, of planes, so we have to buy in Korea, for example, in the United States. We have to pay more. This is the problem within the European Union, with a very low capacity to increase quickly production of military equipment, but also of ammunition, which is also a problem for Ukraine, how we can support Ukraine without this European, so to say, capacity. We have to invest in that. And it is understanding, let me repeat in Poland, that it is necessary.
Mr. Timo, I'd like to hear your point on this, but there's been quite a while since the Winter War here in Finland. Yeah. Every family had some sort of loss during that time. The sacrifice was immense, and the impact on Finnish culture has been also quite impressive, so to speak. Nevertheless, today Finland is a tier 1 country when it comes to its economy. For society-wise, it's the happiest country within the framework of nation states. Can it endure another reality of sacrifice, and does the government handle it? Of course, the new government is quite recent, but is it handling that with the sanctity it deserves?
I hope so. There is a cemetery section in every municipality where there is a section of those heroes fallen both in Winter War and Continuation War. And as a result of that war, we held our independence from Russia, from Soviet Union and communism. And it was a very, very harsh conditions for the peace. We lost, for example, 12% of our soil and tens of thousands of lives. But as a result of that, we still have a conscription army, still. And that was a kind of a spiritual heritage of those heavy losses, that we never ever cut military spending, cut the army, even so that everybody else did. But what I see as a threat also in Finland and also in the Western Europe, because as Klaus said, there are multiple crises. There is crisis of war. There was crisis of COVID. Now there is a crisis in economy, rising interest rates, rising price of energy, rising price of food. And this combined, people feel very depressed. They feel the economical life very challenging. And then there is a temptation, in a way, that why should we pay because our life is very harsh? But that is why we have to have leaders throughout the Europe who tell that if we don't stay firm now, the whole system of peaceful Europe could collapse. And that is a kind of collision we never ever want to see happening.
General Naumann, I'd like to hear a broader perspective on the matter of the necessity to show leadership in a reality that is challenging governments at this stage. Germany obviously has been making investments, trying to bolster its military capacity. It's doing so also in collaboration with the Netherlands, for that matter, on a few fronts. But when you really look at the big picture, it's lagging behind from reality. Of course, it's not necessarily taking the French approach, where they want to develop their own systems and their own capabilities, which may take years on end and may not necessarily deter the enemy, but it seems like Germany is not prepared. What needs to be done, and where are things heading at this stage?
Well, to say it quite honestly, Germany neglected the necessity to defend the country and to be a reliable member of NATO for more than 20 years. We believed erroneously in the idea of peace is at hand in our time, and there is no danger any longer. A German defense minister coined the phrase, "We are surrounded by friends." I think had he spent a minute, he would have seen that this was an erroneous statement, at least when he at the same time asked for an increase of defense spending. How should the normal citizen understand, if one is surrounded by friends, that we need more money for defense? It's impossible. And we made this mistake. The German Chancellor, I think, woke up to reality under the impression of the Russian attack on Ukraine and called for the Zeitenwende, the turn of time. This decision was right. It deserved to be supported by all parties in Germany. Unfortunately, this was not the case. And for that reason, I think we still are not as decided as necessary to implement this Zeitenwende, which is not only a question of money and of armament buying. It is the necessity to change the thinking of the German people, to make them understand that danger is at hand and that we have to do something, which means much more than buying tanks, aircraft, or ships. It means to be prepared for the unexpected. And that is what is still lacking.
You're talking about a flawed education system in broader terms. Can Germany come to a consensus about altering its education system to insert more of a national aspiration to ensure the fortified capacity of Germany to withstand foreign threats?
I think we made first steps. If you look at this national security strategy, the first ever, which was agreed upon by a German cabinet, it contains a lot of useful elements. It falls short in one aspect. It still sticks to the illusion that this all can be handled by sticking to the same relationships in the budget as we have it right now. You cannot establish a national security strategy or implement it if you stick to the distribution between social welfare and security as we have it right now. And the courage to tell the people we have to change and we have to invest more, not only in defense, but also in security in the wider sense. Energy security, financial security, border security, and all this stuff. That is still missing. It will come, but we have a national attitude with Germans, which you probably know. We always do the right thing, but very often too late.
Indeed. Well, Professor Rosenthal, I'm somewhat baffled. And I'm sorry that I need to challenge you on this one.
Okay, please.
But Minister-President or Prime Minister Rutte in the Netherlands, on the one hand, several months back, declares the intention of the Netherlands to invest heavily in strong power and the capacity to withstand foreign challenges and to be a contributing force globally to the North Atlantic Organization Treaty. And then just last week, we have Volodymyr Zelensky coming to the Netherlands and somehow leaving with all of the Air Force capacity on the air-to-air capabilities of the Netherlands. 42 F-16 fighter jets are just given at the expense of the Dutch security. What am I missing?
What you are missing is the logic on the hand of Prime Minister Rutte of the Netherlands, who said on a question from journalists about this, he said, well, our front line is in Romania and Baltic countries, etc. So we are delivering, and also the front line in Ukraine. So I could say, I think that was a sort of clever kind of answer on his part. At the same
Somewhat
time,
inaccurate, considering the fact that a Russian bomber just recently flew towards the Netherlands.
Sure, you are completely right on this. At the same time, his argument was, well, we give. Zelensky said, you will get 42. Rutte didn't confirm it explicitly, so there is some margin. Nevertheless, Rutte also said, well, we give them these F-16s, but we are going now for F-35, so don't worry, he said in a way to the people in the Netherlands. I didn't hear up till now some remarks on the part of the media, etc. on this. Now, actually getting down to earth and to figures, it is very, very problematic that my country now is again lagging behind the 2% NATO. We are lagging behind by 500 million. And now I see coming the next elections in the Netherlands in November, and it will exactly be so that defense will simply be a competitive thing towards health, education, the fact that many people in the Netherlands can't afford themselves, young people, to get a house. It will be about immigration and asylum. So the leaders of my country will be put to a litmus test, actually, whether they will come up in the coming government with the 2% NATO. That's simply the fact there is. And whether it is in the mindset of the people that they have to go for this 2%, well, elections will show. The results of the elections will show whether it is in the mindset of the people that we do need this 2%, and we also do need some reserve capacity to defend our own territory. Well, we'll see.
And of course, the capacity to withstand whoever enters office in the United States past 2024. Professor Czaputowicz, when we're looking at the Polish perspective of things, Poland has always been wary of the Russian bear. It's in the mindset engraved within society, and the government has more leeway than Western nations to contend with such a reality. Nevertheless, the economy is lagging behind. It is challenged within that reality, and acquisitions are lagging to a certain degree because of the huge quantities of acquisitions already perpetrated for the sake of Ukraine. Where is the leeway the moment the economy starts to withstand reality, in which we see more and more challenges to all nations in the European continent, not Poland exclusive?
I think that our economy is doing quite well in comparison to other countries. We profited a lot from our membership in the European Union. So GDP is growing. It could be, of course, better. Particularly, we have some issues with the European Union concerning reconstruction fund. So if it comes, will be even better than it is. But the problem is how you prioritize your goals. So for Poland, security is very important. And we appreciate very much the decision of Prime Minister Rutte to provide these planes to Ukraine, because our security, European security, Poland's security, depends on the resolution of that conflict. If Russia has a feeling of winning that conflict somehow in the future, we will be in trouble. So we have to still mobilize public opinion within the European Union and in our countries that we have to support militarily and economically Ukraine. So it's a very good decision. This is also our way of thinking. When we provide our planes, we provided a lot of them to Ukrainians. It was easier because they were Soviet time planes.
Not the F-16s.
Not the F-16s. You have to have them, but we had another one which was important for Ukraine because the pilots were already trained. They knew how to use them. So that was immediate decision. But we would support them in the future as well. So this is how I see. But there is relations with the economy, of course. But first, you have to pay also from the social, so to say, perspective in decrease of standard of living sometimes, if you want to be secure. And this is an understanding. I hope it will be an understanding in Poland, easier in countries on the eastern flank, because the feeling of danger is more eminent than in Western Europe. But I don't see any enemies surrounding the Netherlands that they have to defend themselves with this F-16. Look at the neighbors. So the main threat is Russia. They would not come to the Netherlands unless they defeat Ukraine, Poland, Germany. So we are safe.
Well, with that being said, as I mentioned to Professor Rosenthal, there was a strategic bomber heading in the direction of the Netherlands just a couple of weeks ago. We had Norwegian aircraft and Dutch aircraft scrambling together to intercept, and they managed to intercept, and the bomber went back. So there is an added value to being able to protect your own nation by yourself in such a scenario, and not putting all your eggs in one basket and hoping others to protect you. But I'd like to ask you, Mr. Soini, when we're looking at Finland, obviously Finland has been studying the Ukrainian arena quite closely, considering the fact that you also, here in Finland, are a frontline nation, so to speak. Just recently, the acquisition of the David Sling was the greatest development on that part from a defensive perspective, but also F-35s and other acquisitions from the West, and of course the integration also into NATO. Is Finland more secure today?
I think so, that it was a good decision, and it was widely accepted by the Finnish population. Only 8 out of 200 MPs voted against the NATO membership, so it was a landslide, and it was good in that sense. But of course, now when we are taping this in the capital of Helsinki, this Kiev is closer to us than the outskirts of our own country in Lapland. So we know that it is very, very near. It's the neighborhood, and I must say that the awareness of the crisis may be bigger in Poland, Baltic countries, and Finland, which have a direct contact with either Belarus or to Russia, and the Finnish border to Russia, 1,340 kilometers. It's the double that the all other NATO countries together, and our border is still open. You can cross over to Russia from various parts of Finland if you have the visas. That is still ongoing. There is huge interest on that, and of course the membership of NATO. Now we have an ongoing negotiations, also bilateral with United States, about the bilateral agreement inside the NATO countries. And then, of course, I'm hugely interested for the forthcoming European Union parliamentary elections. What will be the agenda for common foreign and security policy? Most of the European citizens don't even understand that we have that kind of framework in Europe. Whether this is going to be any kind of factor in agenda when we are heading the elections. So there is quite a lot of at stake, and then considering our neighborhood is still Sweden. Sweden has applied the membership of the NATO, but Turkey has blocked it, and the Hungary is giving the support to Turkey at the moment, and this is not very good.
Well, I'd like to touch on the Swedish angle for a moment. Is there any prospect for Sweden to join NATO? within a reality in which Turkey is just, quite frankly, unwilling to deliver?
Well, I'm not so familiar with the rules of the bazaar from a Turkish perspective, but to some extent I'm still confident that Erdogan will consider the strategic importance of the Swedish membership at the end of the day. He knows that the Finnish membership meant in reality that Putin strategically lost the conflict. If you compare his declaration of December, when he demanded to turn the wheel back to 1997, to the reality of 2023, everyone will agree Putin overplayed his hand, he lost strategically. And for that reason, Erdogan will come to the conclusion, from my perspective, as soon as the time is ripe from his point of view, and as soon as the price will match his expectations, he will give in and will agree. And Hungary, I think, will follow suit immediately as it gets a wink from Ankara.
Indeed. Of course, the main reason behind the Turkish decision has to do with the extradition of Kurdish individuals within Sweden, but nonetheless, those are also Swedish citizens. Sweden cannot just deliver. So Turkey is, of course, playing its hand here. And my question is the latest when it comes to the burnings of the Quran in Sweden, in Denmark. Turkey has also utilized this as another bargaining chip within the composition of Sweden's joining of NATO. Do you see Turkey altering its position again within that composition? Because the strategic understanding of the situation is quite frank. When it comes, though, to Turkish considerations, the elections are behind us. What is holding them from doing so?
Well, I would say that we shouldn't underestimate the sentiments. I'm not talking about my sentiments, but they are also there. But the sentiments and the feeling of the population at large in Turkey and in the Islamic world about what is happening in Sweden with the burning of the Quran. And I think that that for Erdogan, the overwhelming factor in all this is, of course, eventually the strategic issue, which is already elaborated by Klaus Naumann. But I would say that this burning of the Quran is one of the most intricate predicaments for our societies, because we do understand that something is happening which we don't like, but at the same time we are living in countries where freedom of expression is cherished. I understand from the Finnish side that in Finland, for instance, there may be legal rules which question the burning of the Quran. In my country, the burning of the Quran could be countered by public order considerations, perhaps also by the kinds of considerations relating to what we call incitement to hatred. But it is a very, very difficult predicament. And I would say that on the European end, we should uphold our Western values, including freedom of expression. At the same time, there are some nasty sides to what some people are up to, burning a Quran, burning a Bible, burning a Torah, And you should consider by yourself what would happen to you yourself I could even get quite emotional about it if I would, for instance, see, I'm being from a Jewish background, would see a Torah being burned. When I would see, as a Christian, seeing a Bible being burned, you know, and overall seeing books being burned, books as an expression of civilization and freedom of opinion and freedom of speech.
There was a philosopher once who said, in a place where they burn books, someday they will burn human beings, and that turned out to be a prophetic reality. But I'd like to ask you, Professor Czaputowicz, since this issue, although I obviously do not condone any burning of any book for that matter, but the people doing so are doing so declaratively for the purpose of trying to trigger a reaction to certain double standards from their understanding of reality, in which there is a mass issue with a very large Islamic population entering into Europe and threatening the culture within the European continent that is more of a Judeo-Christian culture rather than an Islamic one. And at the same time, they're also saying, look at all those churches and all those Christians being persecuted all over the world in Muslim majority states, and nobody's raising even a word about that. So what is this reality to contend with?
I think that there is one issue, it's a freedom of expression, that you have a right to express your, so to say, ideas, values through even burning a book or the Quran in that case, but there is also very important freedom of religion. We have to guarantee for religious groups, minorities or majorities, their, so to say, rights to confess their religion and to cherish what they think is very important for them. So I think it is very difficult issue. I am on the side of freedom of religion, so we should not allow in Western society such a gesture, which could be treated as offense by Muslims in that case. So we have to look at every religion through the same lenses.
So you're saying also at the same time that Muslims who convert to Christianity should not be put to death in Muslim majority states?
Of course. I remember such a two, so to say, events. First of all, it was in the New Zealand's the killing of Christians, and then in Sri Lanka, similar acts, counter decision, which both are to be, so to say, criticized, that not accepted. So freedom of religion should be guaranteed, and it has been guaranteed by the United Nations Charter. Some people say that it's the most important freedom from which other freedoms arise. You have to have a right to confess your religion in many countries. Of course, I agree on this at the same time with you, suggesting your question that the most persecuted religion is Christianity these days. When you look at numbers of people killed every day, dozens of them in African countries, in Muslim countries, many they are Christians. But it happens also vice versa. So it's a challenge for humanity how to preserve freedom of religion. And referring to that very case, I hope, I agree with General Naumann that the solution will be found. And I think that also the United States is key player here to convince the Turkey to accept Swedish membership in NATO, because it's very crucial. On the other hand, the Swedes have their values, their rights. They have to protect their citizens, even they came from Turkey previously, and they have to obey their rules. Difficult issue, very unfortunate, and it plays in the interest of, unfortunately, in the interest of Russia, this kind of action. Yeah. So we have to look also from that perspective.
Mr. Sonia, I'd like to hear your position on this. Obviously, you're very close here to Sweden, but also there is a minister here in Finland, or former minister, the former minister of Interior, who was persecuted herself for her religious beliefs.
Yeah, I think this is very important to say it aloud. Päivi Räsänen is the name of the very proven. I think this is her 7th term in the parliament. She has been a cabinet minister, and she quoted in her book the letter to the Romans, which said that the marriage is between man and woman, more or less, and homosexuality is not the proper way to marry. And that is why the state prosecutor prosecuted her from the hate speech. And it has been now ongoing for 2 years. And in the lower court, she did win, and the prosecutor make a complaint, and now it is going to start it next week again in the higher courts. And this is horrendous.
Isn't this equivalent to burning the Bible?
I think, and we are very bad to moralize at the state level anybody's impressions to freedom of religion. If not the former cabinet minister, the member of the parliament who expressed her views 15 years ago is now prosecuted, and this is even the case of malfeasance of using the office. But I think this is connected what Mr. Czaputowicz said, that Christian world, so-called Christian world, the West is pretty precautious because we are largely secular countries, to point out the persecution on Christians in Nigeria, Pakistan, or whoever, because of the nature of our own culture nowadays. But this could be the key also to connect the Islamic world and us to together to celebrate the freedom of free expression and religion, and then we can have combined interest on this. But this is very hard for certain flanks from the left and ultra-liberal sides to even perform this kind of the argumentation.
And sometimes, ironically, there is the horseshoe theory where
that's
Islamists and radical leftists are united on this front. I'd like to move to another step, and that is, if I may, General Naumann, we're looking at the war in Ukraine proper. And we don't see a lot of movement. We see a reality in which, at the beginning, the point that was mentioned was that they're pricking to see the weaknesses and trying to advance on certain fronts. But the quantities of ammo utilized don't show that it's just pricking. It is an attempt after an attempt that is not necessarily successful. Now, when we're really looking at the picture, it also indicates on the same time that the Russians are also failing on their front. Are we still in a hiatus of sorts between both sides?
It's difficult to judge, to clearly assess it at the moment. It seems to me that the Ukrainians have made some progress in the south, but it's highly doubtful whether they will be able to reconquer the city of Melitopol, which is, I think, the key location, since it blocks the access to the Crimea. They are now, as far as I know, some 50 kilometers away from that city, and they are attacking against 3 lines of well-prepared defenses, entrenched positions, widespread minefields. They are lacking the air superiority which they would need in order to cope with the Russian anti-tank helicopters and the Russian Air Force. It's very, very difficult to assess how this entire thing will end. It could well be that we will see more or less a return to the, let's say, the PUT situation, which we saw before the so-called counter-offensive started. But it's at the moment speculation, and I have no access to real information from the ground. But it seems to me that it's more than unlikely that the Ukrainians will succeed in reconquer by the end of this year the occupied territories. Yeah. So what will then happen is really a subject to political speculation, which also means that we have to take into account unknowns such as the American election next year and the willingness of European nations to continue their support for Ukraine. From my perspective, there are 3 points which I think every one of us needs to keep in mind. The first thing is that we have to understand what happens there will determine our future security as well. Should Ukraine fail and Putin win, we are in a situation which will be very, very dangerous for all of us. The second point I think we have to keep in mind, we must not tolerate that any border in Europe can be changed by the use of force. This principle was coined here in Helsinki, and it is the center of all peace in Europe. Should we give up on that, we have lost forever. And the third point we have to keep in mind, looking at the sacrifices Ukraine has made so far, we simply cannot impose on Ukraine anything which means to give up parts of their territory. It's, from my perspective, simply immoral to think of that. Whether it may be politically wise or not, I don't care. But to leave the people of Ukraine alone means, from my perspective, possibly a little bit exaggerated, means the end of the idea of the West.
With that being said, of course, politics and interests are the ones who drive each other rather than morality or other emotional reasoning. But I'd like to ask you, Professor Rosenthal, because I'd like to hear your position on this as well, briefly, if you may. Yep. But also the RGC and Iran in particular have been fueling much of the indiscriminate fire on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, and yet the European Union time and again refuses to designate the RGC on its list of terrorist organizations, something that is spearheaded particularly by the High Representative Josep Borrell. What brings about such a reality?
Okay, let me briefly comment on what you asked, Klaus. Talking winning and losing is the big thing now. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, and I was asked to comment on that in the weeks after the invasion, I took the diplomatic stance on the well-known notion of agree to disagree, agreement to disagree between the enemies. And when I hear that we have to stick to the Helsinki principles and what have we, you're talking nearly about a perennial impasse, because the Russians will not give up on Crimea. The Russians will not give up on the Donbass. So the only outcome should be that they would be driven out of Ukraine territory. So, and then looking at the counteroffensive right now, we are talking about an impasse, more or less. We are talking about enormous casualties also on the Ukrainian side. going from at least 70,000 killed to about 120,000 killed. Those are the bloody margins. 120 to 150,000 wounded people. How long can they take it? You know, that's a realistic question, at least. Now, with regard to Iran, I should say, when I talk about leadership in Europe on several serious things, I would say I'm very much involved, as you know, on the efforts on the part of the Iranian diaspora and the Iranian dissidents in their own country, you know, to get rid of these ayatollahs. It is terrible what I see happening on the European end with regard to putting this in a revolutionary guard on the list of terrorist organizations. Brussels doesn't want to come to terms with the simple fact that the Revolutionary Guard is infiltrating Western Europe right now. All of our countries, including my countries, where people are really threatened for their life. I'm talking about the defense agreement between Iran and Belarus. I'm talking about the fact that Iran is jubilant about its increasingly excellent relations with the Southern Balkan country of Serbia. You know, that is what Iran is all about. Iran being really one of the deliver of the few states, you know, which are going for terrorism in all our Western countries. That is what I'm talking about.
Professor Czaputowicz, I'd like to hear your perspective on this, considering we do not have very much time left in today's panel. But when you look at the security challenges facing Europe at large, but also Poland in particular, are there enough cohesive measures being undertaken in order to ensure that Europe will be able to withstand a reality in which Russia may not succumb?
I think that we have now a possibility to invest in military, and we are doing that in Poland. Other countries should do the same, because until Ukraine fights, we are rather safe, because Russia will not open a new front. So it is time we have now. We have to mobilize, as I said already, society and invest more in armament, and also support militarily, financially Ukraine. What else we can do? Still maintain sanctions against Russia, and it is very important, maybe enlarge these sanctions. Diplomatic work is crucial to convince countries like China, like India. Iran is rather lost, I agree, because Iran's strategy is to be against the West everywhere it's possible. So they will do that policy, but
not only China and India for that.
But also
Brazil, South Africa.
Yeah, so it is, and Ukraine is here very good. Tries to also use this moral, so to say, advantage, moral values to convince, particularly democracies like India, South Africa, Brazil, to support them and not to accept, because I fully agree with General Naumann, that we should not accept any acquisition, because it will be the end of international system based on UN Charter and Helsinki Accord, of course. So this is, but as I said, I'm not very optimistic about the future of that conflict, war between Russia and Ukraine, because so reserves are much bigger on the side of Russia than on Ukraine in terms of people, of soldiers, of losses. It's much more populous, Russia, than Ukraine. The only thing Ukrainians can use is technological advantage of their military equipment, which is on our side. Countries which support Ukraine to provide them what they need to sustain, even not to win, but simply to sustain, because this is the time which is not the worst for us.
Mr. Soini?
I think the resilience in the Western countries is very important, because there will be a lot of hybrid operations. Russia will be involved in all kind of propaganda systems in the internet, and they try to divide every country to cause havoc inside the societies and plant the seeds to disagreement with the European Union. And that is kind of the immaterial front which is used without weapons, but can be as poison, as a big poison as anything else. So we need resilience and also an ability between the people to read the news in the proper way, because there are all of those stories, behind the scenes stories and everything else. So we must be prepared for the long time conflict, which is going to cost us as well.
We have a few seconds left. I'd like each and every one of you to have one brief sentence. What is the most important to focus on for the month ahead? General Naumann.
I think we need to understand that what is at stake is our freedom. And if we are not prepared to bear and accept responsibility to defend and protect this freedom, we will lose.
Professor Rosenthal?
Don't give up on spending on defense in a situation where cutbacks, austerity policies are in the offing.
Professor Czaputowicz?
Maintaining support for Ukraine, military support and economic support.
Cooperation and determination.
All right, well, this is all the time that we have for today, unfortunately, as there's still a long list to deliberate. Nevertheless, I'd like to thank General Naumann, Professor Rosenthal, Professor Czaputowicz, and Mr. Soini for partaking in today's panel, and I'd like to thank all of you as well at home. Until next time, from here in Helsinki, have a good evening. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at tv7israelnews.com.